My name is Harper Vale, and that night under the glittering chandeliers of the Willow Creek Estates Community Center, the light caught the stiff pastel blazer the HOA president had bought with community dues. "This table is for real community pillars," she whispered just loud enough for the silence to register. "The outsider can find somewhere else." They thought I'd come to give my blessing. I came to end things right in the middle of the sponsor toast with a compliance clause they never saw coming broadcast on their own gala screen. I'm 32 years old. By day, I am the Director of Supplier Compliance for Beacon Wilder, one of the largest retail conglomerates in the country. My job is to live in the fine print. I find discrepancies. I unravel shell corporations. I ensure that the beautiful polished products on our shelves don't have a rotten illegal supply chain hidden behind them. I am in essence a professional demolitions expert for pretty facades. It was a skill set I was about to employ right here in our so-called perfect suburban neighborhood. The table in question, the Legacy Residence table, was the crown jewel of the reception hall. It sat nestled right against the gleaming dance floor with an unobstructed view of the stage where the HOA president and her husband would soon be toasted. It was the best seat in the house, a circle of 10 chairs draped in ivory linen, each setting a masterpiece of polished silver and folded napkins. It was the founding family's table. I knew its specifications intimately, not because I had been consulted, but because the invoice for its sponsorship had been forwarded to my personal email 2 months ago. $30,000, a wire transfer from my savings to the Willow Creek Community Center to cover the shortfall in the HOA's deposit. A phone call from the president, Pam Hargrove. Her voice a frantic whisper of, "Oh Harper, you're a lifesaver. The gala has to be perfect for the real residents." I had simply replied, "Consider it done," and signed the check. I was the neighborhood's silent investor, their human backstop, the one who handled the ugly paperwork so they could enjoy the beautiful picture. Pam glided toward the table, a vision in layers of tailored linen that whispered against the marble floor. Her smile was a practiced, brilliant thing she had perfected during her decades of ruling covenants with an iron fist while quoting community values. She saw me as I was tucking a heavy envelope under the lead violinist's sheet music stand, a cash tip, a discreet thank you for their work. It was a professional courtesy, something I did with vendors. Pam's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by something thin and sharp. She watched me approach the legacy table, my designated seat, the seat I had paid for, and she positioned herself to block my path. Her husband, Evan, the board treasurer, materialized at her side. He was handsome in a corporate sterile way, his suit perfectly tailored, his eyes the color of a balance sheet. "Harper," Pam said, her voice a silken thread of condescension. She glanced at the place card with my name on it, then back at me. Her lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one that always preceded a casual cutting cruelty she had honed since she first pinned on the president's badge. "This table is for real community pillars," she whispered, her voice pitched perfectly too low for a public scene, yet just loud enough for the half-dozen guests nearest us to hear every syllable. "The outsider who doesn't respect our covenants can find somewhere else." The air grew thick. Outsider. Not neighbor. Not resident. A label designed to reduce me to a footnote in Willow Creek history. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the subtle shift of a neighbor's body, the quick downward glance of a guest as they unlocked their phone, the screen's glow illuminating their face. They weren't just listening. They were recording. The gentle clinking of silverware on china around us seemed to stutter and fall silent. The string quartet might as well have been playing in a vacuum. Evan's eyes swept over me. It wasn't a look of concern or embarrassment. It was an audit, a swift, cold appraisal from head to toe, lingering for a moment on my tailored dress, my sensible heels, my purse. It was the look of a man assessing an unexpected item on a spreadsheet, a potential liability that needed to be managed. He saw inventory, not a fellow homeowner. His silence was his endorsement of Pam's cruelty. He was complicit. Of course he was. His entire tenure on the board was built on strategic complicity. 1,000 responses ignited in my throat, each one sharper and more satisfying than the last. I could have dismantled her with a single sentence. I could have held up the receipt for the very table she was barring me from, but that would be a skirmish, and I was here for a war. Public humiliation was her weapon of choice. Mine was far more sophisticated. I swallowed the words, forcing them down with a sip of iced water from a passing waiter's tray. The liquid was cold, a shock that cleared my head and solidified my resolve. My gaze drifted past her perfectly coiffed hair to the massive LED screen that formed the backdrop of the stage. It currently displayed a tasteful looping video of swaying willow trees, but I knew its schedule. In 47 minutes, during the sponsor thank you segment of the toasts, it would be running a program of my own design. The Beacon Wilder logo currently displayed on the digital timeline in the corner would be the star of the show. My hand tightened on my clutch. Inside, nestled next to my wallet and phone, was a USB drive. It was no bigger than my thumb, a sliver of black aluminum, cool to the touch. Felt like a blade. It was a blade. It contained a single, elegantly constructed file, a video file disguised as a sponsor acknowledgement, embedded with a compliance disclosure clause so dense with evidence it could end careers and trigger a state investigation. It was the culmination of 6 weeks of late nights of cross-referencing invoices, of tracing phantom payments through shell companies until they led right back to the treasurer. Pam was still smiling, waiting for me to crumble, to retreat in tears to some forgotten table in the back next to the kitchen doors. That's what the old Harper would have done. But the old Harper didn't have access to international banking records and state commerce filings. I didn't leave. I didn't retreat. I offered her a placid, unreadable smile. "You're right," I said, my voice even and calm. "My mistake." Then I turned, but I didn't walk away from the stage. I walked toward it. I moved past the gawking neighbors and the frozen waiters, my heels clicking with quiet purpose on the marble. I navigated the maze of tables until I reached table 2. It was just as well appointed, just as close to the action, its occupants 3 older men in expensive suits, and their wives looked up in surprise. I recognized them from the research I'd done on the board. They were the audit committee. "Excuse me," I said to the event planner, who was rushing over with a panicked expression. "There's been a change in the seating plan. I'll be sitting here." Before she could protest, I took the empty seat directly facing the LED screen, placing my purse firmly on the table in front of me. I had a better view from here anyway, a perfect unobstructed line of sight to the screen, to the stage, and to the precise moment when the whole beautiful rotten facade would come crashing down. I was no longer at the legacy table. I was at the witness table, and the show was about to begin. From my new vantage point at table 2, I had a perfect view of the facade. I watched Pam arrange herself at the table I'd paid for. A living portrait of upper-middle-class HOA success. Her husband stood beside her, a stoic, silent statue in a well-fitted tuxedo. His contribution to any neighborhood event being his quiet, non-disruptive presence, and at the center of it all was Pam, the sun around which the Willow Creek planets had always orbited. They were a perfect picture, a still life of happiness. It was the only thing our neighborhood had ever truly excelled at producing. For as long as I could remember, we had been assigned our roles. Pam was the face of the association, the beautiful, charming front-end product. Her husband was the head of finance, obsessed with optics and public perception, ensuring every newsletter, every holiday card projected an image of flawless community bliss. And I was the back office, the accounting department, the legal counsel, the one who handled the paperwork. When Pam needed covenant violations polished, they came to me. When the annual assessments became too complicated, the shoebox of receipts landed on my desk. I was the fixer, the manager of inconvenient details, the silent guarantor of the neighborhood's polished veneer. My arrival 5 years ago as the single professional who bought the house on the corner was the first and most significant piece of paperwork I was ever associated with. A foundational fact that Pam had always wielded as proof of my status as a subsidiary, not a shareholder in the community enterprise. I remember standing on the clubhouse stage, clutching a trophy for organizing the neighborhood cleanup. Pam took exactly 1 photo before rushing to the other side of the room to capture her own family in borrowed costumes, smiling in the HOA talent show. "The lighting is just better over here, honey," she'd explained later, as if that settled the matter. The message was clear. My contributions were data points, but Pam's photogenic presence was the headline. So she ruled with covenants that banned flags longer than 30 days and required grass exactly 2.5 inches, while her own backyard somehow escaped every inspection. It was a career of curated moments, each one more hollow than the last. She wasn't selling a neighborhood. She was selling the idea of a perfect community, an idea she herself was desperate to believe in. The association, however, was perpetually on the verge of insolvency. Then Evan Hargrove entered the picture. And for Pam, it was like a Series A funding round. He wasn't just a treasurer. He was an investor, a strategic partner who could elevate the Hargrove brand from precarious HOA president to wealthy socialite. He arrived just as my own career was taking a significant turn. Beacon Wilder had been hit with a massive fine for a supplier's labor violations, and as a result I was tasked with spearheading a new draconian supplier compliance protocol. We were tightening the screws, vetting every vendor, scrutinizing every gift, and terminating contracts with anyone who couldn't prove their operations were pristine. The world of kickbacks and cozy under-the-table deals was my new hunting ground. The collision of our worlds was inevitable. It happened last Labor Day. The setting was as always perfect. A gas fireplace crackled. The effect was what mattered. The scent of barbecue and fresh-cut grass filled the air, and Pam was directing a photo shoot of the table setting before we were allowed to eat. Evan, Pam's husband of 15 years, sat next to me, exuding an aura of expensive cologne and effortless condescension. He'd spent most of the evening discussing stock options and the deplorable state of market regulation. Then, as I was passing the potato salad, he turned to me, his smile a thin, curious line. "Harper, I've been meaning to ask about your work. This new push on supplier compliance at Beacon Wilder, those gift and entertainment clauses, do they really need to be so rigid?" The question was a carefully calibrated probe disguised as polite neighborhood conversation. The table fell quiet. Pam looked momentarily panicked, as if I might launch into a boring lecture and ruin the festive mood. Her husband continued chewing his food, studiously avoiding eye contact. Pam's smile tightened. I felt a familiar cold clarity settle over me. I placed the bowl down with a quiet click. "That's an interesting question, Evan," I said, meeting his gaze. I allowed a small, knowing smile to play on my lips. "Are you asking for the board or for the upcoming gala?" A flicker of annoyance, surprise flashed in his eyes before being suppressed. He let out a short, dismissive laugh and raised his wine glass. "Just curious about the industry," he said, and took a long sip. He didn't answer the question. He didn't have to. The entire table exhaled. The moment of tension passing. The conversation moving on to Pam's latest covenant enforcement victory over a bird feeder that was 2 shades too bright. But the seed was planted. A board treasurer doesn't ask idle questions about gift clauses at a block party. He was fishing. He was testing my boundaries. And he had inadvertently told me exactly where to start digging. The next Monday, I was in my office until 2 a.m. Fueled by stale coffee and professional suspicion. I ran a deep dive on every vendor the HOA had used in the last 3 years, cross-referencing it with our own internal high-risk watch lists at Beacon Wilder. It was a long shot, but Evan's question had been too specific, too pointed. There was nothing. Just the usual mess of holding companies and third-party logistics firms that big associations use to obscure their spending. Then I got a hit. A small, innocuous-sounding vendor popped up, flagged for its association with 2 other companies that had been investigated for bribery. The vendor's name was North River Events, LLC. My blood ran cold. I stared at the name, a knot tightening in my stomach. The company was registered as a provider of corporate engagement and event services. According to their file, the HOA had paid them a significant sum for the community gala planning. But when I looked at the date of the alleged services, I found it was scheduled for the exact same week as the clubhouse renovation that magically included Pam's personal patio upgrade. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place 2 weeks later. Pam, in a flurry of gala planning anxiety, forwarded me a contract from one of the vendors for a quick look over. She trusted my eye for fine print, especially when it involved deposits. The contract was for the complete audiovisual package for the Willow Creek Community Center, the lighting, the sound system, the massive LED screen currently looming behind the stage. The vendor who had signed the exclusive all-inclusive deal was North River Events, LLC. It was a perfect, elegant loop of association rot. Evan was using HOA funds to pay an inflated invoice to a shell vendor. That vendor in turn was providing its services to the gala at a massive discount, essentially allowing the board to pay for their lavish event with community money disguised as a business expense. A classic kickback scheme laundered through the pageantry of the neighborhood's own celebration. Sitting here now at table 2, I watch them. They are laughing, clinking glasses, accepting congratulations. They believe I am here in my designated role, the helpful, slightly awkward resident, the neighborhood's resident administrator here to help with the ceremony. They think I am a guest. They have no idea that in my mind I am on site for a final audit. The evidence has been collected. The report has been written and the presentation is queued up. This isn't a community gala. It's a risk assessment hearing. And I'm about to make my findings public. The string quartet transitioned into a bland instrumental version of a love song. The notes washing over the room with the same inoffensive character as the beige linen napkins. From my seat, I could see the digital clock on the corner of the LED screen. 7:31 p.m. The toasts were scheduled for 8 o'clock. 49 minutes. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. The cool liquid a counterpoint to the methodical fire of my thoughts which were replaying the precise documented steps that had led me to this moment. It was a process as familiar to me as breathing the audit trail. It began with my own money. The memory was sharp and clear. A digital receipt seared into my brain. The call from Pam had come on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was thin with panic, explaining that the final non-refundable deposit for the community center was due by noon and a check for the association's reserve fund hadn't cleared. It was a classic Willow Creek financial fire drill. I had simply hung up, opened my banking app, and initiated a wire transfer. Amount $30,000. Destination Willow Creek Community Center Client Events Account. In the memo field, a space most people ignore, I typed a deliberate, legally significant phrase, personal funds, no HOA affiliation. The confirmation email arrived at 10:47 a.m. I saved it as a PDF. File name Willow Creek Personal Contribution 0716. It was my clean receipt, the baseline against which all other transactions would be measured. My $30,000 were legitimate, a gift from a neighbor, albeit one given under duress. It was clean money. Evans was not. At 11:18 a.m., on that very same day, an invoice was paid to North River Events LLC. The amount was $180,000 wired from an HOA corporate account. The line item read, Services Rendered Community Engagement Gala Q3. The discovery of this transaction deep within the third-party payment logs I had gained access to was the moment suspicion hardened into certainty. The timing was too perfect. The amount too round. It was sloppy. Evan was arrogant. He thought no one would ever look. But my entire career was built on looking. The coincidence was a flare in the dark. I dug deeper. The booking confirmation between the HOA and North River for this Phantom Gala listed a technical setup and testing day. That day was the Thursday before the gala. It was the same day the community center's event schedule showed a technical run-through for the Willow Creek annual gala. The personnel manifest for both events listed the same 3 AV technicians. The equipment ledger detailed the exact same speaker models, the same number of LED panels, the same mixing board. It was irrefutable. The HOA's gala and the personal upgrades to Pam and Evan's backyard patio were the same event serviced by the same people using the same equipment at the same location. One was a community expense. The other was a private party. The next step was to connect the dots between the vendor and the treasurer. North River Events LLC was a ghost online with a stock photo website and a single generic email address. But every registered business in the state has an employer identification number and EIN on file with the IRS. It's a unique digital fingerprint. I ran North River's EIN through a public records database. The registered address wasn't a sleek office building. It was a P.O. box at a mail services store in a suburban strip mall. I then ran a search for other businesses registered to that same P.O. box. A single result came back. Hargrove Advisory Partners, LLC. It was a dormant consulting firm Evan had established years prior, a corporate shell bearing his own name. He wasn't just directing association funds to a fraudulent vendor. He was directing them to himself. With the money trail established, I turned my attention to the gala contract Pam had so helpfully forwarded. I scrolled past the fluffy language about creating magical moments to the appendix with the billing summary. There it was on page 7. A line item that made my breath catch. Package discount tier 1 sponsor 40%. 40% was a massive, commercially unjustifiable discount for a venue like the community center, but it was the notation in the adjacent column that sealed it. It read sponsor cross-credit applied. The mechanism was suddenly crystal clear. The $180,000 payment from the HOA to North River wasn't just to cover the AV equipment. It was an overpayment, a slush fund. That excess cash was then used by North River to pay the community center, directly triggering a sponsor discount on Pam and Evan's final bill for their personal patio project disguised as the gala. It was a clean criminal circle. Association dues were siphoned through a shell company to pay for a private event, laundering money through floral arrangements and champagne towers. I spent a weekend at my dining room table surrounded by documents, bank statements, invoices, public filings, email confirmations. I didn't see them as disparate pieces of paper. I saw them as a single cohesive narrative of fraud. I translated that narrative into my native language, a spreadsheet. I created a document I titled the Gift Kickback Matrix. In column A, the payment from the HOA. In column B, the recipient, North River. In column C, the shared address with Hargrove Advisory. In column D, the services provided to the gala. In column E, the corresponding fraudulent discount. It was a stark, simple, and utterly damning flowchart of corruption. At the bottom of the page in the notes section, I typed a single bolded line: quid pro quo, risk high potential violation of state HOA fraud statutes. I printed 3 copies. The delivery mechanism for my findings arrived on a silver platter in the form of an email from the gala planner. The subject line was urgent asset loop for LED screen. The email was cheerful and peppered with exclamation points. She needed a short video file, no more than 30 seconds, to run in a loop during the toasts to honor and thank the generous sponsors of the evening. She asked if I could get something from Beacon Wilder's marketing department. I replied within the hour. No need to bother them, I wrote. I have a standard acknowledgement file I can adapt. We'll send it over by end of day. I didn't create a PowerPoint. I created a weapon. I used a simple video editing program. The first 5 seconds were pure corporate schmaltz. The sleek Beacon Wilder logo gliding across the screen set to an inspiring generic synth track. The next 10 seconds featured smiling stock photos of diverse office workers with text overlaying them. Beacon Wilder, connecting your community. It looked exactly like the kind of self-congratulatory fluff a sponsor would provide. But then, at the 16-second mark, the tone shifted. The music faded slightly. New text appeared at the bottom of the screen in a smaller, more official-looking font. This presentation is made in accordance with Beacon Wilder vendor gift entertainment policy and state code on HOA gifts kickbacks. It was a compliance notice disguised as a gesture of transparency. And then for the final 10 seconds, the screen cut to black and a clean, simplified graphic of my gift kickback matrix filled the screen. No commentary, no accusation, just the names, the numbers, and the lines connecting them, all presented in calm corporate blue and white. It was an auditor's report presented as an art installation. Before exporting the final video file, I did one last thing. I went into the file's metadata, the invisible data that travels with any digital object. There I embedded a hyperlink. It didn't lead to Beacon Wilder's website. It led to the public intake form for the County District Attorney's Vendor Integrity Portal, a one-click gateway to a formal investigation. I attached the file sponsor acknowledgement final.mp4 to my reply and sent it. The planner responded almost immediately. Got it. Looks perfect. You're a lifesaver, Harper. I looked at the screen here in the grand hall, watching the willow trees sway. Perfect. She had no idea. In their eyes, I had just provided a simple video. In reality, I had just armed a missile and handed them the launch codes. Before I ever sent that video file to the gala planner, before I even built the matrix, I followed the proper channels. It was a crucial part of the game, a demonstration of due diligence that would be vital later. Vengeance is a messy, emotional affair. A compliance action, however, is a model of cold procedural clarity. I chose to conduct a compliance action. My first move was to test the HOA's internal defenses from a terminal at the county public library using a newly created anonymous email address routed through 3 separate VPNs. I submitted a report to the HOA's official ethics and compliance hotline. My report was a masterclass in dispassionate fact-telling. It detailed a potential conflict of interest involving a senior treasurer, a vendor named North River Events LLC, and the misallocation of association funds for a private function. I provided invoice numbers, dates, and the publicly available registration data linking North River to Evans Shell Company. I didn't mention the gala. I didn't mention my name. I was merely a concerned party, a hypothetical whistleblower. I hit send and closed the browser, leaving no trace. 3 days later, a reply landed in the anonymous inbox. It was a work of art in corporate non-communication. Thank you for your submission. The matter you raised has been referred to our internal review board and investigated accordingly. At this time, we have found no evidence of any violation of association policy. We consider this matter closed. The email was unsigned, sent from a do not reply address, a Stonewall. They hadn't investigated. They had buried it. They had received a map to a fire and had chosen to admire the wallpaper as the building burned. This email was my Exhibit A. It was the proof I needed that the system was not just broken but complicit. It was my justification for what came next. My next move was to protect myself and my employer. I scheduled a call with Eleanor Klein, the general counsel for Beacon Wilder. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s with a mind like a steel trap and a spine to match. I had learned more about power and strategy in my biweekly meetings with her than any business school could ever teach. I laid out the situation for her on a secure line, omitting the neighborhood connection and presenting it as a third-party compliance issue I had stumbled upon involving a major HOA board. I stated the facts: the money trail, the shell company, and the HOA's internal dismissal. She listened without interruption, the silence on her end of the line more telling than 1,000 questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You have the documentation, I presume?" she asked, her voice calm and even. "Every receipt, every filing, all from public sources or anonymously provided?" I confirmed. "Good," she said. Her next words were not legal advice. They were strategic commands. Hold the evidence. Do not engage publicly. Beacon Wilder cannot be seen to be initiating an action against another entity. It's bad for business. There was a pause. I felt a chill of disappointment, thinking she was telling me to stand down, but then she delivered the checkmate move. However, if a third-party trigger were to occur, a media report, a whistleblower going public, a regulatory filing, that would change the landscape. If the information becomes public through no action of our own, we would be obligated to review our relationship with the HOA. Keep your evidence pristine, Harper, and wait for a trigger. She was giving me a shield and a sword. She was telling me not to start the fire, but if a fire just so happened to start, I should be ready to act. She had given me my rules of engagement. I needed a third-party trigger. I decided I would have to manufacture one. Before I could do that, they made a move of their own. I received a cryptic text from a number I didn't recognize. "Coffee. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Pine Street Cafe. We need to talk about the HOA." There was no signature. They were trying to get me off their turf to handle me quietly. I agreed. The man who met me was Mark Renshaw, the HOA's head of compliance. He was a soft, doughy man in a suit that was too tight at the shoulders, his face glistening with a nervous sweat despite the cafe's air conditioning. He avoided my eyes, stirring his latte with a frantic energy. He dispensed with the pleasantries. "Listen." He started, his gaze fixed on the swirling foam in his cup. "We got your message, the anonymous one. We appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and you found no violation." I stated, my voice flat. "It's a complicated situation," he hedged. "Intra-community event financing can be nuanced. Fraud is rarely nuanced." "Mark," I replied, taking a calm sip of my black coffee. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. Look, Evan is a valuable asset to our board, and I know you're connected to the neighborhood. Don't ruin a community gala over a misunderstanding about some invoices. It was the weakest threat I had ever heard. An appeal to a sentiment he couldn't possibly believe I possessed. I set my cup down gently. First, I said, leaning forward just enough to make him lean back. This is not a misunderstanding. Second, I have no intention of ruining a gala. I'm an auditor, Mark. My job is to test systems. You have a fraudulent firewall between your association expenses and your executive's personal accounts. I'm simply pointing out that your firewall is on fire. He paled. He had come to intimidate me to appeal to my better nature. He had failed to realize I was all out of better nature. He left the cafe without finishing his latte. The meeting was a success. I now had confirmation that the HOA leadership was aware of the problem and was actively trying to suppress it. My chessboard was nearly set. I had my evidence. I had my corporate shield from Mrs. Klein. I had confirmation of a cover-up from compliance. Now I needed to alert the authorities. I placed a call to the county district attorney's public intake line for commercial fraud. I spoke to a tired bureaucratic voice explaining that I was a third-party analyst who might soon be in possession of a public disclosure of association malfeasance. I asked what their evidentiary requirements were for opening a formal investigation. We can't act on hypotheticals, the voice droned. But if a public disclosure of specific evidence is made, we would require a complete and unaltered copy of that disclosure. If it's a video, we need the original file. If it's a document, the original PDF. Once it's public, it's a matter of public record. The final piece clicked into place. The video file wasn't just my tool for revenge. It was the official evidence. By playing it at the gala, I would be making a public disclosure. It would become the unaltered original file the DA's office required. All that remained was the logistics of the presentation. I emailed the gala planner confirming the timeline. Just checking on the sponsor thank you slot at 8 p.m. I wrote, posing as a helpful resident. Beacon Wilder's branding team is very particular about timing for maximum impact. The planner replied enthusiastically, confirming the slot was locked. The last piece of the puzzle was the only person who could stop me, the AV technician. The afternoon before the gala, during the technical run-through, I found him coiling cables by the stage. I approached him not as the neighborhood resident but as a representative from the sponsor. I handed him a crisp $100 bill. A little extra from the sponsor for your hard work, I said smoothly. He pocketed it immediately. I have one small technical request. I continued, my tone all business. During the sponsor acknowledgement video, the file is named Sponsor Acknowledgement Final. I'll be running a remote network integrity test. It's crucial that the file plays from start to finish without any interruption. Can you make sure the system is locked to that file for the full 30 seconds with no overrides from the main console? He nodded, not remotely interested in the details. Lock the show file to your clip. Got it. No problem. He was my only accomplice and he had no idea. He was just a guy doing his job, taking a cash tip and following a client's technical instructions. The pieces were all in place. The legal framework was built. The association's stonewalls had become the justification. The system had been given every chance to correct itself. Now the system would be corrected for them publicly, irrevocably, in front of everyone they knew. The game was set. All I had to do was wait for the clock to strike 8. The digital clock on the LED screen read 7:31 p.m. A waiter silently refilled my water glass. The men at my table, the members of the HOA audit committee, were engaged in a loud, boisterous conversation about golf swings. They were oblivious, comfortable in the bubble of their own importance. My mind, however, was miles away, tracing the ghost trails of data and deceit I had followed for weeks. This wasn't just a matter of a few suspicious invoices. It was a carefully constructed ecosystem of fraud, and I had meticulously mapped every shadow and shell within it. The chase began with the corporate registration for North River Events, LLC. The documents listed a single director, a woman named Brenda Mayhew. The name meant nothing to me. It was common forgettable, the perfect name for a front. A quick search on a professional networking site gave me a face and a work history. Brenda Mayhew was a 28-year-old accounting assistant. Her most recent job, which she had left 6 months ago, was a junior role at a small boutique firm, Hargrove Advisory Partners. The connection was an electric jolt. She wasn't a random signatory. She was an ex-employee, a pawn from Evan's own discarded chess set. He had used a former subordinate, someone who likely needed the cash and wouldn't ask questions, to be the legal face of his criminal enterprise. It was clean, cowardly, and for him deniable. But the money didn't just stop at North River. As I peeled back the layers of their financials, I found another shell, another layer of insulation. The large payments from the HOA weren't sitting in North River's account. They were being immediately rerouted past through another entity called Braywell Logistics. The name suggested a fleet of trucks, a bustling warehouse. The reality was another P.O. box. This one in a different county. Braywell Logistics, according to state commerce records, had 0 registered vehicles, 0 employees, and 0 physical assets. It was a phantom. A digital bucket used to wash the money, to break the chain of custody between the HOA's payment and the eventual expenditures on things like orchids and artisanal ice sculptures for the gala, plus Pam's new patio. Following the trail was like chasing a ghost through a hall of mirrors, each reflection designed to obscure the money's origin. Evan was clever. I had to give him that. His true masterstroke was in the vendor contract with the community center. When I got my hands on the full contractor list, I saw the detail he had buried in plain sight. North River wasn't just listed under audiovisual services. Their official designation was AV Sponsorship Management, 2 extra words that provided the entire legal pretext for their existence. As sponsorship manager, North River was the official intermediary for all corporate sponsors, namely Beacon Wilder. This designation authorized them to handle the funds, to negotiate credits, to be the very financial hub that made the entire scheme plausible on paper. He had built the cover story directly into the event's operational framework. It was a firewall made of words, and he thought it was impenetrable. For a time, I allowed myself to believe that Pam was a victim in all this, a clueless beneficiary of her husband's largesse. It was a comforting thought, a way to cordon off my anger and focus it solely on Evan. That comfort evaporated one evening as I was scrolling through Pam's neighborhood social media. She had posted a gallery of candid pre-gala photos. One of them showed her on a velvet couch, phone pressed to her ear, a look of concentration dramatic on her face. The caption read, "The final details are a killer. Can't wait for the big day." I almost scrolled past it, but something caught my eye. A tiny black object in her ear. I zoomed in, the image pixelating slightly. It was a professional-grade clear coil acoustic earpiece, the kind used by event staff and security for discreet communication. And on the small black base, almost too small to see, was a faint white logo. It was the stylized river and pine tree emblem of North River events. My blood turned to ice. That wasn't a prop. That wasn't a fashion accessory. That was internal operational equipment. Pam wasn't just the president. She was communicating on the vendor's private channel. She knew the name of the shell company. She knew who was running the show behind the scenes. She was at a minimum a willing participant. Her performance of the frazzled, clueless president was just that, a performance. This whole gala wasn't just a fraud perpetrated by her husband. It was a joint venture. That discovery simplified everything. It removed the last shred of neighborhood obligation from the equation. I was now dealing with 2 co-conspirators. I spent the next few hours breaking down their entire scheme into its component parts. A 3-pronged framework of fraud. First, dual ledger invoicing, creating one set of inflated bills for the HOA's gala and another heavily discounted set for the personal patio. Second, discount swapping, converting the association overpayment into a personal financial credit. And third, circular cash flow, laundering the money through Braywell Logistics to obscure its path back to the gala vendors. It was a closed loop of criminality, and I had the map. Knowing that the information in my video might be too dense for a panicked, champagne-fueled crowd to absorb, I created a contingency. I drafted a simple 1-page document on my laptop. I titled it A Guest's Guide to Sponsor Integrity, in plain simple English with no legal jargon. I explained the 3 pillars of the fraud. It was an executive summary of a crime. At the bottom of the page I placed a large QR code. I linked it not to a file but directly to the county DA's official online portal for reporting commercial bribery. It was a one-scan path to becoming a whistleblower. I saved the file ready to be distributed if needed. My next step was to hire my own witness. I had no faith that the official gala photographer hired by Pam to capture flattering soft focus moments would document the truth of what was about to happen. I found a freelance photojournalist online, a man named Marcus Thorne, whose portfolio was filled with gritty, candid shots of protests and corporate confrontations. I met him for coffee and gave him his instructions. "I'm not hiring you to take gala photos," I told him, sliding a cash deposit across the table. "I'm hiring you to document an event. Your sole focus is on reactions." At approximately 8:02 p.m., a video will play on the main screen. I want your lens on the treasurer Evan Hargrove. I want it on the president's husband at the legacy table. And I want it on the 3 men sitting at table 2. I don't want pictures of the cake. I want pictures of their faces. Capture the moment they realize what is happening. He just nodded, his eyes lighting up with professional interest. He was a predator just like me, and he smelled blood in the water. That night, after all the pieces were in place, I opened my work journal, a simple leather-bound book where I sometimes jotted down thoughts on complex cases. Under the date, I wrote a single sentence, a guiding principle for the entire operation. It wasn't a cry for revenge or a burst of anger. It was a mission statement. Don't make them ashamed. Make them accountable. Shame was a fleeting, useless emotion. Accountability was a permanent structural change, and I was about to rebuild their entire neighborhood world. The gala reception was a chessboard, and every guest, every server, every vendor was a piece. Most of them were pawns moving in predictable patterns, unaware of the larger game. Pam and Evan thought they were the king and queen, the center of the universe around which everything revolved. They were mistaken. They were merely the targets. I was the player, and I had been arranging the board for this exact moment all night. My first move had been my relocation. When Pam had banished me from the legacy table, she thought she was shaming me into a corner. My original assigned seat at table 9 was in the far Siberia of the hall, a social statement of my peripheral status. She expected me to retreat there. Instead, I saw her clumsy emotional move for what it was, an opportunity. I approached the gala planner, her face a mask of flustered anxiety. I gave her a warm, sympathetic smile. "I know this is a terribly last-minute request." I began, my voice pitched with gentle sincerity. "But would it be possible for me to sit at that empty seat at table 2 from table 9? I won't be able to get any good candid photos of the board during the toasts from here." I gestured to the seat. "The angle is just perfect." The planner, desperate to avoid any more neighborhood drama, looked from me to the empty chair and back again, her mind clearly calculating the path of least resistance. "Oh, of course, Harper. Yes, whatever you need." She couldn't see the strategic value of the position. She only saw a simple, sentimental request. She didn't understand why a small secret smile touched my lips as I took my seat. She didn't know that table 2 was the most important square on the entire board. Seated with me were the 3 knights Evan had unwittingly placed in my path. The members of the HOA Audit Committee. There was Gerald Croft, the chairman, a stern man in his late 60s, whose reputation for merciless association governance was legendary. Beside him was a younger, sharper man named David Singh, known for his ambition and digital forensic skills. And rounding out the trio was Michael Bennett, a veteran of the committee, who had seen everything and whose weariness was matched only by his meticulous attention to detail. They were Evan's guests of honor, there to be impressed by his lavish new life. In reality, I had just seated myself in the jury box. My next move was subtle, executed under the cover of the salad course being served. From my clutch, I removed a small stack of thick cream-colored cards. They were beautifully printed, designed to be an exact match for the gala's official stationery. On the front, in elegant script, they read, "Thank you for celebrating with us. We are grateful for the generous support of our sponsors." They looked harmless, another piece of bespoke gala paraphernalia, but on the back I had printed a small clean QR code. As the waiters moved around the table and conversation flowed, I slipped one under the edge of each of the audit committee members' bread plates. I did the same for their wives. The cards settled onto the white linen, looking for all the world like they belonged, their innocent pawns that were in fact gateways to the entire conspiracy. I checked the digital timeline on the gala's mobile app. My video was perfectly camouflaged. The schedule simply read 8 p.m. Toast sponsor acknowledgement. My file with its blandly corporate name was queued and ready. No one would look twice. It was the digital equivalent of a hidden blade. To ensure my blade would strike its target, I needed to control the environment. I excused myself and made my way to the DJ booth, which was tucked away in a corner near the stage. The DJ, a young man with headphones around his neck, was scrolling through a playlist. I leaned in once again, playing my role as the helpful representative from the sponsor. "Hi there," I said with a professional smile. "Just a quick note from the sponsor. During our 30-second video clip, the Beacon Wilder one, we need the background music dropped to about 10%. The audio in the clip is just ambient, but marketing wants the on-screen messaging to have maximum clarity. Can you handle that?" "Yeah, no problem," he said, barely looking up as he made a note on his laptop. "Drop the bed track for the sponsor clip." "Got it." He had no idea he was now my co-conspirator tasked with creating the sudden attention-grabbing silence my presentation required. Returning to my seat, I executed my next move. I pulled out my phone beneath the table, the screen's light hidden by the tablecloth. I sent a single encrypted text message to my counsel, Mrs. Klein. It read, "Trigger event is imminent. I will not be speaking. The documentation will speak for itself." Her reply came back in less than 10 seconds. "Understood. Awaiting public confirmation." The light was green. My corporate shield was in place. As I slipped the phone back into my purse, it vibrated with an incoming email. My heart gave a single hard thump. It was the automated reply I had been waiting for. The subject line was from the County District Attorney's Office. I opened it. The message was brief and bureaucratic. "Your report has been received. A file has been opened in our system under case BC 7810927. You will be contacted if further information is required." It was done. A case number now existed. The gears of the law were primed, waiting for a public catalyst to begin turning. I had one final piece to move into position. My insurance policy, my queen. From my purse, I retrieved a slim sealed manila envelope. Inside was a high-speed duplicate of the USB drive. I scanned the room for my hired photographer, Marcus. He was leaning against a pillar, camera idle on his hip, his eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's patience. I caught his eye and gave a slight nod. I walked over to him, keeping my path casual. "This is for you," I said in a low voice, handing him the envelope. "Keep it in your jacket pocket. Do not open it. Here's your final instruction. If anyone, the MC, the planner, the treasurer, attempts to stop the video that plays at 8 o'clock, or if you see anyone approach the AV booth while it is playing, I will give you a signal. I will tap my water glass twice like this." I demonstrated on a nearby tray. "The moment you see that, you walk directly to the MC on the stage. You hand him this envelope and you say these exact words. This is an urgent legal statement from the sponsor that must be read aloud immediately." Marcus's eyes widened slightly as he took the envelope, feeling the hard shape of the USB drive inside. A slow grin spread across his face. "Checkmate," he murmured. "Not yet," I replied. "But soon." I returned to my seat at table 2. All my pieces were now in play. The board was set. The trap was laid. I glanced at the LED screen. 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for the game to end. The clock on the LED screen ticked over to 8 p.m. As if on cue, the string quartet played a final flourishing note and fell silent. A hush thick with anticipation and the lingering scent of expensive wine descended upon the Willow Creek Community Center. The MC, a man with professionally whitened teeth, and a tuxedo that shimmered under the chandeliers stepped up to the microphone on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "If I could have your attention, please, it is now time for our toast to the neighborhood and our generous sponsors." A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. The house lights dimmed and a single warm spotlight settled on Pam and her husband as they rose from the legacy table. They looked magnificent. Pam was radiant, her smile a beacon of rehearsed joy. Evan stood beside her, his arm possessively around her waist, the very picture of a successful, handsome treasurer. He picked up his champagne flute, the crystal catching the light. The room was his stage, and he was ready for his performance. "Thank you, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and confident, the voice of a man accustomed to addressing board meetings and homeowners. "Pam and I are just overwhelmed seeing all of you here, our friends, our community. It means the world to us." He paused for effect, letting the sentiment hang in the air. "I want to thank my fellow board members for raising such an incredible association. And I want to thank our generous sponsors for helping us create such a perfect, unforgettable evening." He raised his glass higher, a gesture of magnanimous gratitude. His eyes swept the room, and for a moment they met mine. There was nothing in them. I was just a part of the scenery, a face in the crowd. His gaze moved on, settling on Pam with manufactured adoration. "But there is one person in particular," he continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "who really went above and beyond to help us make this night a reality. We are so grateful." His words were vague, but Pam knew exactly who he meant. Her eyes, glittering with triumph, darted across the room and locked directly onto mine. The polite smile on her face twisted just for a second into that familiar venomous smirk. She mouthed the words slowly, soundlessly, a final public assertion of her dominance. "Outsider." It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a joke she was sharing with herself at my expense. A final twist of the knife. Confident that I was now permanently relegated to the sidelines, a non-entity at the celebration she believed I had been forced to finance. She thought it was her checkmate. She had no idea it was my cue. As the applause for Evan's toast began, I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the marble floor was unexpectedly loud in the cavernous room. It was a discordant note in the symphony of celebration, and it made heads turn. The applause faltered. I saw Pam's face, her smile collapsing into a mask of confusion and horror. Her husband looked down at his plate as if he could will himself invisible at the head table. Pam's smirk evaporated, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Evan's smile tightened at the edges. I picked up my own champagne flute, mirroring Evan's pose. Every eye in the room was on me. "I'd also like to offer a word of thanks," I said, my voice perfectly calm, carrying easily in the sudden silence. I paused, letting the tension build, letting them wonder what I was about to do. I turned my head slightly, looking toward the stage, toward the treasurer. "A toast to those who work so hard to keep things transparent." The final word, transparent, hung in the air like a chord of doom. And at that exact moment, as if summoned by the word itself, the hall lights dimmed further. A pre-programmed command to focus all attention on the stage. The giant LED screen behind Pam and Evan cut from the image of swaying trees to absolute black. For a single breathless second, there was nothing. Then the screen exploded with light. The sleek silver logo of Beacon Wilder filled the screen, gliding into place with a gentle futuristic swoosh sound. An inspiring generic piece of corporate music began to play. It was exactly what everyone expected. A standard, slightly cheesy acknowledgement of the evening's main sponsor. I saw Evan give a confident nod, a little flicker of pride in his eyes. He thought this was his victory lap. 1 second, 2 seconds. The logo shimmered, 3, 4, 5. At the 6-second mark, the logo smoothly faded to the top corner of the screen. In the center, in a clean sans serif font, new text appeared, but it wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a slogan. It was a single devastating line of official text. Disclosure per state code on HOA commercial gifts and kickbacks. To 99% of the room, the words meant nothing. It was boring legal jargon that didn't register. But at my table, at table 2, it was a bomb going off in slow motion. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at the audit committee. Gerald Croft's polite, fixed smile vanished as if it had been wiped clean. He put his wine glass down, his eyes narrowed, reading the text again. David Singh, the forensics expert, leaned forward, his whole body tensing as he instantly understood the implication. He wasn't just reading a disclosure. He was reading the headline of an indictment. And Michael Bennett, the weary veteran, simply let out a quiet, almost inaudible sigh. He had seen this story before. A murmur started at our table. "What the hell is that?" I heard Singh whisper across. The ripple of unease began its journey across the room. I turned my gaze to the stage. I looked directly at Evan. His eyes were still on the screen. His mind faster than anyone's, processing the catastrophic collision of his professional and personal worlds. The legal code. The word kickbacks. His smile didn't fall. It froze. The muscles in his jaw locked. The hand holding his champagne flute, which had been raised in triumph just seconds before, began a slow, almost imperceptible descent. He was a statue cracking from the inside out. The MC, sensing the sudden sour shift in the atmosphere, started to move. His job was to maintain the happy, seamless flow of the evening. And this was a glitch, a dangerous deviation from the script. He took a hesitant step toward the microphone, his mouth opening to intervene. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I simply raised my left hand palm forward in a universal gesture to stop. My eyes were still locked on Evan. My expression serene. The MC, caught in the crossfire of this silent, intense battle, froze in his tracks. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the faint, inspiring corporate music still playing from the screen speakers, a horribly cheerful soundtrack to a public execution. In that profound silence, I raised my glass a little higher. My voice was not a shout, but a clear, precise statement of fact that landed with the force of a gavel. "Here's to neighborhoods," I said, looking from Evan's shattered expression to Pam's face, now pale with confusion and dawning fear, "that begin with the truth." My final words, "Here's to neighborhoods that begin with the truth," hung in the dead silent air of the room for a beat. Nothing happened. The screen behind the stage still held the single line of legal code, a sentence that only a handful of people in the room understood, but that everyone could feel was a threat. The inspiring corporate music continued to play its cheerful, vapid tune, a grotesque counterpoint to the frozen horror on Evan's face. Then the screen changed. The transition was seamless. The legal text dissolved, and in its place a new graphic slid into view. It was my gift kickback matrix. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a weaponized infographic presented in Beacon Wilder's own clean corporate branding of blue and white. The effect was devastatingly professional. The title at the top was simple: Willow Creek HOA North River Events LLC. A financial summary. Below it the columns were stark and clear. Payer, recipient, date, amount, purpose. The first row was a punch to the gut. Payer, Willow Creek HOA. Recipient, North River Events LLC. Amount, $180,000. Purpose, Community Engagement Gala. And next to that line, a high-resolution scanned image of the actual HOA invoice, complete with Evan's authorizing signature, materialized on the screen. A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer abstract. This was evidence. The matrix built its case line by line. The next row showed the link to Evan's shell company, Hargrove Advisory Partners, displaying the shared P.O. box address from the public filing. Then came the final damning connection. A new subtitle appeared in bold red letters at the bottom of the screen. A caption to the entire sordid affair: finding funds determined to be a cross-credit against services rendered for a private event, the Hargrove Patio Upgrade. The name of the project. Today's date. The lie was exposed not by an accusation but by their own paperwork broadcast on a 50-foot screen. And then in the top right corner of the screen the final element appeared. A large black and white QR code materialized stark against the corporate blue. Beneath it, the text was an open invitation to anarchy. Public intake, Portal County District Attorney scanned to report suspected commercial bribery. The room, which had been frozen in shock, erupted. The first to move was David Singh at my table. He didn't hesitate. His phone was already in his hand, and he immediately pointed his camera at the screen. A moment later, I saw the browser page open on his phone. He was on the government website. He was filing a report. Gerald Croft, the chairman, was furiously typing a text message, his face ashen. They were no longer guests. They were an audit committee in emergency session. Across the room, a sea of small rectangular lights began to glow as dozens of guests raised their phones. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by the frenetic modern instinct to document a disaster. They were recording the screen. They were scanning the code. I had deputized the entire gala party. Pam at the legacy table was a statue of disbelief. Her hands were covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that went beyond social embarrassment. This was the utter destruction of the perfect community picture she had spent a lifetime curating. Her husband, for the first time I could ever remember, looked directly at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a look of profound, devastating shock, as if seeing me, truly seeing me and what I was capable of for the very first time. The spell on Evan finally broke. His corporate paralysis gave way to pure animal panic. He launched himself from the stage, stumbling, his perfectly polished shoes slipping on the slick dance floor. He wasn't walking. He was running. A desperate, clumsy sprint, not toward me, not toward his wife, but toward the AV booth at the back of the room. He had to stop the truth as he ran. Pam, who had been left alone in the spotlight, a beautiful president in a suddenly ugly world, turned to me. She took a few faltering steps off the stage, her multi-thousand-dollar blazer tangling around her ankles. Her face was a mess of confusion and terror. She looked like a child who had just seen a monster step out of her closet. "Harper!" She stammered, her voice a raw, desperate whisper that barely carried. "Harper, stop it. Please stop. This is our gala." I looked at her, at the president who had dismissed me, humiliated me, and profited from a crime that was now laid bare for all to see. I felt nothing. The rage had burned away weeks ago, leaving only the cold, hard certainty of this moment. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "I'm not stopping the truth," I said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. By now, Evan had reached the AV booth. He shoved the young technician, a boy no older than 20, out of the way and threw himself at the control console. He began hammering buttons, slapping at the touchscreen, trying to override the system to cut to a different input to make it all just go away. Nothing happened. "It's locked, man," the technician stammered, stumbling back. "The show file is locked for a network test. Do something," Evan roared. His voice a raw, ugly sound that tore through the room. His mask of sophisticated control was gone, incinerated, leaving only the panicked, cornered fraud underneath. And at that moment, the final sound cue in my video file triggered. The inspiring corporate music cut out abruptly. The entire community center was plunged into a ringing, absolute silence, broken only by Evan's frantic shouts and the frantic whispers of the guests. Evan, in his final desperate frenzy, saw the thick bundle of cables running from the console to the floor port. He lunged for them, grabbing the main HDMI cable, the digital artery of the entire presentation. He braced himself and pulled, yanking it with all his strength. My photographer Marcus had been waiting. His lens was focused not on the screen but on Evan. In the dead silence of the room, the sound of the shutter on his camera was like a gunshot. Click. He captured the perfect shot. The treasurer, his face contorted in a mask of rage and desperation, literally and figuratively pulling the plug on his own life, while the image of his crime still hung luminous and damning on the screen behind him. He was too late. The Matrix had been on screen for a full 27 seconds. The truth was out. The file had been delivered. The case was already open. The HDMI cable was disconnected. But the image remained. It was burned onto the retinas of every guest. A digital ghost that no technical fix could erase. For a moment, the only sound in the Willow Creek Community Center was the feedback from the fallen microphone, a high-pitched scream that seemed to articulate the collective horror in the room. Then another sound began to rise, a sound utterly unique to the modern age of crisis. A low, vibrating hum. It was the buzz of dozens of phones, all vibrating in near unison all across the room. Guests were looking down at their screens, their faces illuminated by the glow. The DA's public intake portal, as I knew it would, was sending out automated acknowledgments. Emails with the subject line "Report Received" were flooding inboxes. Each one contained the same text. "Thank you for your submission. Your report has been logged under case BC 7810927. It was a digital receipt for witnessing a crime. They weren't just guests at a gala anymore. They were now officially linked to a numbered criminal case file. The scandal had become interactive. From the chaos order began to emerge, but it was not the kind the gala planner had intended. Gerald Croft, the chairman of the HOA audit committee, rose from his seat at my table. His movements were slow, deliberate, and radiated a cold, lethal authority. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the screen. He pushed his chair back, the sound a loud scrape of judgment, and began to walk. He did not rush. He moved with the grim purpose of an executioner, his path taking him directly toward the AV booth, where Evan was still standing, pale and trembling, the dead cable dangling from his hand. "Evan." Croft's voice was not a shout. It was a low, guttural command that cut through the murmuring like a razor. Evan flinched, turning to face him. "We are going to have a conversation right now." The other two members of the committee, Singh and Bennett, rose and fell in behind him, a silent, grim-faced escort. The association was retracting its protection in real time, forming a human wall between itself and its now toxic treasurer. The gala planner, a frantic woman with a smeared line of lipstick, was babbling into her headset, her eyes wide with panic. "Go to the slideshow," I heard her hiss. "Kill the feed and run the childhood slideshow on the screen," which had gone black after Evan pulled the plug. A single jarring image flickered to life, a photo of Pam as a little girl on a swing, smiling innocently. It was a desperate attempt to rewind time, to plaster over the horror with nostalgia. But my network integrity test had one last command in its sequence. Before the slideshow could fully load, the system's priority command reasserted itself for the final 3 seconds of its scheduled run. The image of the smiling child vanished, replaced one last time by the cold, hard facts of the gift kickback matrix. The past could not erase this. At the legacy table, Pam finally broke. A terrible, ragged sob tore from her throat. She wasn't looking at Evan or the screen. She was looking at the guests, at the 100 glowing phones pointed in her direction, capturing the public demolition of her life's work. This was her nightmare, not failure, but imperfect public failure. Her husband stood up. He walked slowly, deliberately away from his weeping wife and his catatonic board. He walked to my table. He stopped behind my chair. He said nothing. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder. The weight of it was immense. A lifetime of quiet disappointment and passive silence concentrated into a single point of contact. But for the first time, it did not feel like a burden. It felt like an acknowledgement, an alliance. Pam stumbled toward me, then her face streaked with tears. Her presidential illusion shattered. She reached for me, her fingers trying to close around my wrist. "Harper, I didn't know," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know about any of this. It was the last lie she would ever try to tell me." I looked at her hand, then at her face. I didn't pull away angrily. I simply withdrew my arm, a slow, gentle, and absolute retraction. The space between us was now an unbridgeable chasm. I had given her my answer. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Mrs. Klein. It was brutally efficient. "Do not say another word. Your work is done." I took a deep breath, nodded to no one, and sat back down in my chair. I picked up my water glass, my hand perfectly steady, and took a long, cool sip. I had lit the fuse. Now my only job was to observe the blast. The MC was a deer in the headlights, stranded on the stage, the fallen microphone still shrieking at his feet. He was saved by Marcus, my photographer. Marcus moved with the calm purpose I had paid for, striding directly to the stage and handing the stunned MC the sealed envelope. The MC fumbled with it, tearing it open. His eyes scanned the note inside, his expression shifting from panic to a strange kind of relief. He had been given a script. He bent down, picked up the microphone, and tapped it. The feedback died. "Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice trembling as he read from my note. May I have your attention? Due to a technical issue regarding sponsor compliance, this event is now temporarily suspended. We ask that you please remain in your seats for a moment. The words sponsor compliance landed like another grenade in the stunned room. The lie was now the official story. All eyes turned back to Evan. Croft and the committee had him cornered against the wall. Their quiet, intense interrogation, a silent tableau of association justice. Defeated, Evan pushed past them and began the long walk of shame back to the stage. He looked like a ghost, his face a waxy, bloodless shade of white. He was no longer the master of the universe, the charismatic treasurer. He was just a man in an expensive suit that now looked like a costume. He reached the center of the stage, the spotlight finding him again, isolating him in his disgrace. He looked out at the silent, staring crowd, at the forest of phones still pointed at him. He reached for the microphone in the stand, perhaps to deny, to apologize, to say something that could possibly staunch the bleeding. His hand trembled violently. His fingers brushed against the microphone, but he couldn't grasp it. It slipped, tilted, and fell from its clip, hitting the stage with a loud, hollow thud that echoed through the sound system like a drum beat of doom. The impact was followed by another long, piercing wail of feedback. It was the only eulogy his career would get. The long, dying scream of the feedback from the fallen microphone was the only sound that mattered. It was the sound of a system crashing, of a facade being torn down to the studs. The chaos was a storm contained within the glass walls of the community center, the audit committee leading Evan away like a prisoner, Pam's inconsolable sobs, her standing lost and alone in her beautiful, pointless blazer. But from my vantage point, it was all just data. The final chaotic results of a meticulously executed stress test. Slowly, as if an unseen hand was turning a dimmer switch, the house lights began to rise from their dramatic gloom. Not to full brightness, but to a flat, unflattering clinical level. The new light didn't feel celebratory. It felt like the lights in an interrogation room being switched on. It illuminated the wreckage. And in the center of it all, bathed in a soft ambient glow from the chandeliers above, was the legacy table, the table I paid for, the $30,000 table. It was empty. The chairs were pushed back at sharp, chaotic angles. A half-eaten bread roll lay abandoned on a plate. A champagne flute had been overturned, a pale stain spreading slowly across the ivory linen like a spreading wound. Everyone who had been sitting there, the real pillars, had stood up and walked away, either in shame and horror or to administer their own brutal form of justice. The centerpiece of white roses was the only thing that remained, a silent, fragrant witness to the collapse. The table, once a symbol of my exclusion, was now a monument to their ruin. I looked away from the table and back to the stage. The giant LED screen, which moments before had been my billboard of truth, was now a perfect, polished black mirror. The swaying trees were gone. The corporate logo was gone. The matrix of fraud was gone. In its place, I saw a single clear reflection, my own. My face was calm. My posture was straight. My expression was unreadable in a room full of distorted, fractured people. My reflection was whole, sharp, and perfectly clear. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my wallet. From it, I took the slim metallic credit card I had used to make the wire transfer. I looked at it for a moment, the physical representation of the hook they had baited for me, the hook I had turned back on them. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it down. I simply slipped it back into its slot in my wallet. A transaction completed. An account settled. A small smile touched my lips, a genuine one for myself and myself alone. This table, I thought, my gaze sweeping back over the empty chairs, is finally for the real family, the family of consequences, the family of truth. And with that, I stood up. My work here was done. I turned my back on the stage, on Pam, on Evan, on the entire tableau of their self-inflicted destruction. I began to walk toward the grand glass doors that led to the exit. My heels made a sharp, distinct sound on the marble floor. Click, click, click. It was a steady, unhurried rhythm, the sound of a clock ticking, of a process reaching its inevitable conclusion. Each step took me further from the wreckage and closer to the clean, quiet night outside. There was no applause. There was no final dramatic speech or explanation. I offered no apology, and I certainly did not receive one. My departure was not an event. It was simply an ending. I reached the doors and pushed one open. The cool night air of Willow Creek washed over me a welcome balm. I stepped through and let the heavy door swing shut behind me. It closed not with a slam but with a soft final whoosh of pressurized air. A sound as quiet and definitive as the last page of a case file being closed and put away forever. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to share where you are in the world and what you thought of Harper's Revenge. Let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you want to help this story reach more people, please support us by hitting that button. It makes a huge difference.